Imagine stepping back in time to the American Wild West, a period often romanticized in movies and books as an era of rugged individualism, vast landscapes, and thrilling adventures. We picture cowboys on horseback, dusty saloons, and epic standoffs at high noon. But behind this veneer of Hollywood glamour lies a much grittier and frankly smellier reality. The daily life of settlers, cowboys, miners, and townspeople was a constant battle, not just against the elements or outlaws, but against an unseen enemy: filth. The concept of hygiene as we understand it today was virtually non-existent, and the challenges of staying clean in a world without modern conveniences were immense. This was an age where a bath was a rare luxury, where the air was thick with odors we can barely imagine, and where life-threatening diseases spread with alarming ease due to a profound lack of sanitation. Forget the heroic figures with pearly white teeth and freshly laundered shirts. The truth is that the Old West was a place defined by dirt, grime, and a pervasive struggle for basic cleanliness. The hygiene challenges of the 19th century American frontier were deeply rooted in the very fabric of daily existence. For many, life was a transient and arduous affair. Cowboys spent weeks, sometimes months, on long cattle drives, sleeping on the hard ground, and wearing the same set of clothes day in and day out. The opportunity to bathe was an extreme rarity. When they did manage to wash, it was often a quick dip in a cold, murky river, sharing the water with livestock and whatever else might be floating downstream. The soap available was harsh, often made at home from lye and animal fat, which could be brutal on the skin. In the burgeoning towns and mining camps, living conditions were hardly better. People were crammed into small, poorly ventilated cabins, tents, or boarding houses. These tight quarters meant that personal space was a luxury, and so was fresh air. The combination of unwashed bodies, sweaty clothes, and confined spaces created an olfactory environment that would be unbearable to modern sensibilities. The constant presence of livestock, which often roamed freely through the streets, added another layer of stench and filth, with manure being a common feature of the urban landscape. This widespread lack of personal cleanliness was not simply a matter of discomfort. It was a public health crisis waiting to happen. Poor hygiene in the American Wild West stemmed directly from these extended periods without bathing, the cramped and unsanitary living conditions, and a fundamental lack of proper sanitation infrastructure. The result was not just a society plagued by unpleasant odors, but one where illnesses ran rampant. Diseases that we now consider preventable, such as dysentery, cholera, typhoid, and smallpox, spread like wildfire through communities. Without an understanding of germ theory, people saw no connection between the filth they lived in and the sickness that frequently claimed the lives of their loved ones. A simple cut or wound, if not properly cleaned, could easily become infected, leading to gangrene and amputation, or worse, a slow and agonizing death from sepsis. The very air they breathed, thick with dust, smoke from wood fires, and the miasma of decay, contributed to respiratory problems. In essence, the rugged, romanticized life of the frontier was a daily gamble with invisible pathogens, where survival depended as much on a strong immune system as it did on a quick draw. Among the myriad of hygiene-related afflictions, infestations of lice were particularly widespread and democratic in their reach, affecting everyone from the lowly drifter to the supposedly well-to-do town merchant. These tiny parasites, known colloquially as seam squirrels for their habit of nesting in the seams of clothing, were a constant and itchy companion for many. The primary culprit was the nature of bedding. Beds were often little more than crude wooden frames, or even just sacks filled with straw, hay, or dried corn husks. These organic materials provided a perfect breeding ground for all manner of insect pests, including lice, fleas, and bedbugs. Furthermore, bed linens, if they existed at all, were changed with shocking infrequency. Washing laundry was a monumental chore, requiring hauling and heating gallons of water, scrubbing with harsh soap, and then air drying, a process that could take an entire day. Consequently, sheets and blankets were used for weeks or even months on end, accumulating sweat, dead skin, and a thriving population of parasites. People often shared beds in crowded boarding houses or bunkhouses, facilitating the easy transfer of lice from one person to another. Delousing was a common, albeit private, ritual involving meticulous searching of clothing seams and hair, but it was a battle that was almost impossible to win in an environment so conducive to reinfestation. The core of the hygiene problem in the Old West can be traced back to two fundamental issues: the scarcity and quality of water, and the near total absence of sanitation systems. Water, the most basic element of cleanliness, was often a precious and hard-won commodity. On the arid plains and in desert regions, sources of fresh water could be miles apart. Settlers had to dig deep wells by hand, a backbreaking and dangerous task. The water they drew was frequently hard, laden with minerals that made it difficult for soap to lather, and it was often contaminated. Wells were susceptible to runoff from nearby animal pens or privies, turning them into breeding grounds for deadly bacteria. Rivers and streams, while seemingly a better option, were no safer. Upstream, a town might be dumping its raw sewage, a tannery its chemical waste, or a mining operation its toxic runoff directly into the water that a downstream community relied on for drinking, cooking, and washing. There was no concept of water treatment. People drank what was available, regardless of its color, taste, or what might be lurking within it. Sanitation, as we know it, was a foreign concept. In most towns, there were no sewer systems. The most common form of waste disposal was the outhouse or privy, which was essentially just a deep hole in the ground with a small shed built over it. These were often located perilously close to wells, creating a direct path for fecal contamination of the water supply. When a privy became full, the solution was often just to dig a new hole and move the shed, leaving the old pit of waste to fester. In more crowded urban areas, chamber pots were used indoors, and their contents were unceremoniously tossed into the street or the nearest alley, along with household garbage and other refuse. These open-air sewers turned streets into foul-smelling quagmires, especially after a rain. The accumulation of human and animal waste, garbage, and stagnant water created an ideal environment for flies, rats, and other vermin, which in turn acted as vectors for disease, completing the vicious cycle of filth and sickness. This grim reality stands in stark contrast to the clean and orderly towns of Veth. Western films revealing that the true most relentless villain of the Old West was not a black-hatted gunslinger, but the pervasive and deadly lack of sanitation.